What if everything you believed about the royal family was a lie? What if one revelation could shake the very foundation of Buckingham Palace and rewrite the history of the monarchy as we know it? 5 minutes ago, the world was blindsided. A statement came from King Charles and Prince William that nobody was prepared for. It was brief, but the implications were devastating. Prince Louis, the youngest royal child adored by millions, may not be William's son. The words were simple, the shock indescribable, and the palace walls, once symbols of unshakable stability, suddenly seemed fragile. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine waking up one morning to a headline that challenges everything you thought you knew about your own family. That's exactly what millions of people across the globe are experiencing right now. And yet, even as the news spreads like wildfire, the deeper story remains hidden. There are whispers behind the gilded doors, secrets buried beneath decades of tradition, and a truth that some within the palace desperately want to keep from ever seeing the light of day. For decades, the British royal family has been more than a family. It has been a symbol, a living, breathing institution built on centuries of tradition, ceremony, and public trust. Every smile, every wave, every public appearance is carefully curated, meticulously rehearsed, and strategically timed. But behind the carefully constructed images lies something far messier. Scandals have come and gone, yes, but nothing like this. Nothing that challenges not just the reputation of one prince or one child, but the very line of succession, the narrative of royal bloodlines, and the trust of an entire nation. Now, some might ask, how could something like this happen? How could a revelation this explosive remain hidden until now? The answer lies in secrecy, influence, and a tangled web of relationships that few could ever imagine. Royal aides, private confidants, and those with access to the most restricted corners of the palace have been holding onto fragments of this story for months. And now, like dominoes toppling one after another, the first piece has fallen, exposing a truth that will reverberate far beyond the marble halls of Buckingham Palace. It all begins with Prince Louis. He is a child of innocence, a boy whose laughter has captivated the world, whose every milestone has been celebrated by royal watchers and everyday people alike. Yet even a child wrapped in so much adoration cannot escape the ripple effects of secrets he cannot comprehend. While the world has watched Louis grow, the palace has been quietly navigating a storm, one that threatens to engulf every member of the family. Consider this. What does it mean for a monarchy when the bloodline, the very essence of legitimacy, is suddenly called into question? Succession is not merely ceremonial. It is political, symbolic, and legally binding. If doubts arise about parentage, the consequences extend far beyond embarrassment. Entire strategies, public images, and centuries of tradition are suddenly vulnerable. And this is not mere speculation. This is reality, unfolding before our eyes. Some might say that speculation alone can damage reputations, and they are right. But this story is more than speculation. Evidence has surfaced. Details have been confirmed by sources with direct knowledge of the events, insiders who have watched as palace aides scrambled to contain the fallout. The truth, as shocking as it is, cannot be undone. The announcement by King Charles and Prince William confirms it. A truth so heavy, so unprecedented, that it has left even seasoned royal commentators struggling for words. Yet, while the revelation is shocking, it is only the beginning. There are layers to this story that most people cannot see. How did it come to light? Who had the courage, or perhaps the recklessness, to expose it? What does this mean for Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, who has navigated the pressures of royal life with grace and poise? And what about Prince William, who now faces not just personal heartbreak, but the burden of public scrutiny, a scrutiny that is harsher than anything he has ever known? The answers are complex, and the stakes are higher than ever. Within the palace, every relationship is strained, every conversation measured, and every decision weighed against centuries of protocol. And yet, the very human elements of betrayal, heartbreak, and secrecy have pierced through, proving that even royalty is not immune to the vulnerabilities of the human heart. There are rumors swirling, some whispered by aides in hushed tones, others spreading through the media like wildfire. Some claim this revelation stems from a long-hidden affair. Others hint at mistakes that cannot be corrected. Some allege intentional deception, while others speak of misunderstandings amplified over years of private life lived in public view. Each possibility carries weight, and each has consequences that ripple outward, touching lives in ways that the public cannot fully grasp. But consider this: the story does not end with the announcement. The revelation raises questions, some of which may never be answered publicly. Who truly knew the truth? How did it remain concealed for so long? What are the personal dynamics between William, Charles, Kate, and Louis now that the truth has been confirmed? And most importantly, how will this affect the monarchy as an institution, a symbol of stability, when the foundation of its legitimacy is suddenly shaken? Even beyond the palace, the world is watching. Royal scandals have always captured the imagination, from whispered affairs to public divorces, from financial missteps to headline-grabbing controversies. But this revelation is different. This is not a matter of protocol or propriety. It is a matter of identity, bloodlines, and legacy. The ramifications are immediate, widespread, and deeply personal. And yet, the public only glimpses the surface. Behind the headlines lie private heartbreaks, difficult decisions, and emotional turmoil that will take years to fully process. The media frenzy is inevitable. News outlets across the globe have begun dissecting every possible angle, speculating on motives, and questioning loyalties. Social media platforms are ablaze with opinions, outrage, and disbelief. Fans and critics alike are trying to piece together the puzzle, yet the palace remains largely silent, communicating only what is absolutely necessary. This controlled release of information is deliberate, but it cannot hide the deeper truths that are beginning to emerge. For Prince Louis, the implications are profound. He is too young to understand fully, yet the world will watch him, scrutinize him, and perhaps even question his identity. The adults around him, the ones tasked with protecting him, now face an unimaginable challenge: how to provide a sense of normalcy, love, and stability when the very core of his family identity has been publicly questioned. It is a scenario that most parents could not imagine, let alone a family whose lives are under the relentless glare of the public eye. So what comes next? That is the question on everyone's mind. Will the palace attempt damage control? Will there be resignations, restructurings, or perhaps even more shocking announcements? Will William step forward to assert his position, or will he retreat into the shadows, burdened by heartbreak and scrutiny? And most importantly, how will this revelation reshape the monarchy for generations to come? In just a few minutes, you will hear the full story. You will learn not only about the announcement itself, but the hidden tensions, the secret meetings, and the personal struggles that have led to this moment. You will hear accounts from insiders, experts, and historians, all piecing together a narrative that is as dramatic as it is heartbreaking. And by the end of this story, you may never look at Buckingham Palace or the royal family the same way again. The palace has always been a place of grandeur, tradition, and unyielding secrecy. Marble floors, gilded hallways, portraits of kings and queens staring down through centuries. It all exudes stability. Yet, within those same walls, a secret had been quietly festering, one so explosive it threatened to shake the very foundation of the monarchy. Few could have predicted the scale of what was about to be revealed. And when the first whisper of it reached the ears of King Charles and Prince William, it set off a chain reaction that no one, not even the most seasoned palace insiders, could have contained. It began as a murmur, a casual remark made in passing by a staff member, someone in the kitchens, someone in the private quarters, someone who knew things that they should not have known. At first, it was easy to dismiss. In a palace as large as Buckingham, rumors are inevitable. A misplaced comment about a royal child, an observation of private behavior, a subtle glance exchanged between aides. These were the kind of things that could be explained away. But this rumor was different. It had weight. It had corroboration. And it was about Prince Louis. Louis, the youngest of William and Kate's children, had always been adored by the public. He was the picture of innocence, a boy whose smiles lit up the media, whose every milestone was broadcast and celebrated. Yet, behind those joyful photographs and heartwarming videos, a storm was quietly brewing. There were moments when even those closest to him began noticing inconsistencies, small, subtle things that didn't quite add up. Not in a way that could be immediately pointed out, but enough to make certain advisors pause and exchange knowing looks. And then came the day that would change everything. The day a confidential report arrived at the hands of the king. The report detailed findings that were meant to remain secret indefinitely. It was handled with the utmost discretion, yet its contents were so shocking that King Charles himself could barely conceal his astonishment. He read it once, then again, and for the first time in decades of royal life, a monarch confronted a truth that seemed almost impossible to believe. This secret, this revelation, was about parentage. It was about Prince Louis and the line of succession. It suggested something that no one could have imagined, that William, the future king's eldest son and a figure of stability within the monarchy, may not be Louis's biological father. The report detailed DNA results, private correspondence, and corroborating statements from sources close to the family. It was meticulous, thorough, and devastating. Immediately, the palace went into crisis mode. Courtiers, aides, and advisors were summoned in hushed tones. Discussions that would have normally been scheduled and orderly were now frantic and chaotic. The palace, known for centuries as a symbol of discipline and control, suddenly resembled a hive in turmoil. Every staff member who had access to the information became a potential leak, every decision scrutinized under the pressure of secrecy. For King Charles, this was not just a matter of family. It was a matter of survival for the monarchy itself. Prince William, meanwhile, faced a personal ordeal that few could even imagine. He had spent years carefully building a public image of stability, competence, and devotion to family. And now, without warning, that image was under threat. William had to navigate not only the shock of the revelation itself, but the inevitable scrutiny from the public and media. Every gesture, every expression, every word he would soon speak could be dissected, analyzed, and criticized. The weight on his shoulders was unimaginable. Kate, too, was caught in the middle of the storm. Known for her poise and grace, she had been the anchor for William and their children. But even her strength was tested in ways the public could not see. Behind closed doors, private conversations, whispered reassurances, and quiet tears painted a picture of a woman grappling with betrayal, uncertainty, and heartbreak. She had to be strong for her children, for the family, and for the monarchy, all while managing her own shock and emotional turmoil. But the most vulnerable of all was Louis, a child oblivious to the seismic shift occurring around him, yet unknowingly at the center of it. Those tasked with protecting him now had to consider questions that would never have been on their minds before. How do you shield a child from the truth when the truth itself threatens to destabilize the family? How do you maintain a sense of normalcy in a household suddenly fraught with tension, suspicion, and secrets? How do you ensure that the innocence of childhood survives amidst the chaos of revelation? Within the palace, speculation grew. Trusted aides whispered among themselves, weighing the credibility of the information and debating what needed to be done. Some urged immediate transparency. Others cautioned secrecy, fearing the public fallout. In rooms usually dominated by formality and decorum, panic was creeping in. This was not a scandal that could be smoothed over with a public relations statement or a carefully staged appearance. It was deeper, more personal, and infinitely more dangerous. And then, the media pressure began to mount. Although the palace had successfully contained leaks for months, the first cracks were beginning to appear. Journalists with connections to insiders caught wind of unusual movements, strange meetings, and hushed conversations. Headlines that would normally take weeks to prepare were suddenly drafted in a matter of hours. The world outside Buckingham's walls was starting to sense that something was amiss. And once the news broke, there would be no turning back. Yet, even as the palace braced for the inevitable storm, there were moments of disbelief and denial. How could this be real? How could the lineage of Prince Louis, a child adored by millions and meticulously documented, be questioned? DNA results could be wrong. Miscommunications could occur. Perhaps someone had made a mistake. But as the days passed, evidence continued to mount, corroborated by multiple sources, until denial became impossible. The truth could no longer be hidden. This chapter of the royal family's history was unprecedented. Scandals have touched the monarchy before. Yes, affairs, divorces, and public missteps have all been part of the narrative. But this was not a question of propriety or protocol. This was a question of identity, of lineage, of trust at the most intimate level. And as the palace began preparing for the public announcement, everyone involved knew that the repercussions would be far-reaching, emotional, and utterly transformative. The secret that had been carefully guarded for months, or perhaps years, was about to explode. And yet, for those inside the palace, there was no playbook, no precedent. Every decision, every conversation, every public statement would be scrutinized, analyzed, and potentially weaponized. The monarchy, built over centuries on trust, tradition, and perception, was facing a threat that no ceremonial protocol or royal decree could contain. And for Prince Louis, the center of this storm, life was about to change in ways he could not possibly comprehend. The innocence of childhood, the stability of family, and the foundation of identity, all of it teetered on the edge of revelation. The adults around him, despite their best efforts, knew that once the truth came out, nothing would ever be the same. The word DNA carries with it a sense of finality. In science, it is the ultimate proof, the undeniable signature of identity. And when the palace received the results, there was no denying what they revealed. What had begun as whispers and rumors transformed into cold, unassailable fact. DNA, the very blueprint of life, had spoken. And its message would reverberate across Buckingham Palace and beyond. Prince Louis was not William's biological son. It all started months earlier, though no one outside the palace knew. A confidential investigation had been quietly initiated after subtle inconsistencies in Prince Louis's records and physical resemblance became impossible for certain aides to ignore. Questions that were once dismissed as trivial or paranoid slowly gained weight. Could this child truly be the son of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge? Or had an error, deliberate or accidental, obscured the truth? Those tasked with finding the answer faced a delicate balancing act, uncovering the truth without igniting public scandal, all while navigating the intricate web of palace protocol. The testing itself was a clandestine operation. No ordinary laboratory could be trusted with such sensitive information. The DNA samples had to be collected discreetly, handled with extreme care, and analyzed by experts who understood the stakes. Every precaution was taken. The royal household, with all its history of discretion, ensured that even the smallest detail, who delivered the samples, who transported them, and who analyzed them, was orchestrated to avoid leaks. But despite the careful planning, the tension in the air was palpable. Prince William had been informed in stages. Initially, he was told only that there were questions requiring confirmation, phrased carefully to avoid unnecessary panic. But when the initial results came back, the truth could no longer be sugar-coated. The letters, once benign, now contained a devastating confirmation. There was no margin for error, no plausible deniability. And for William, a man who had spent decades preparing for the role of future king, this was both deeply personal and profoundly public. Kate, too, had to process the news in private, away from the gaze of aides, the press, and public expectation. In the quiet of their private quarters, she struggled to reconcile her love for her son with the implications of the revelation. How could she explain to Louis what was happening in the shadows of the palace? How could she continue to be the calm anchor in the storm when her own world had been shaken to its core? The Duchess of Cambridge, admired for her composure, faced a test unlike any she had encountered. The initial announcement to the king was meticulous, measured, and filled with caution. Charles, experienced in handling crises both personal and political, recognized the gravity of the findings immediately. A wrong word, a misplaced gesture, a hint of emotion could trigger a ripple effect capable of toppling reputations, igniting media frenzy, and destabilizing the monarchy. Yet even the king, seasoned and strategic, felt a rare vulnerability. He understood the personal heartbreak this would bring to William and Kate, and he also knew the wider implications for the crown. But the DNA results themselves were not the only revelation. Alongside the scientific proof came corroborating details, private letters, observations from those closest to the family, and records of past interactions that, in hindsight, pointed to the truth. Each piece of evidence, while seemingly minor on its own, formed a mosaic of undeniable clarity when taken together. The palace had long prided itself on control and precision, and now, that control was slipping through their fingers. It is impossible to overstate the impact of the DNA confirmation on the inner workings of the palace. Every member of the household who had knowledge of the tests suddenly carried a heavy burden. Gossip that once might have been harmless became dangerous. Staff conversations were measured carefully, with even casual remarks potentially triggering suspicion. The public, meanwhile, remained entirely unaware. Yet the palace knew that the moment this truth emerged, the reaction would be instant and intense. Headlines would scream, social media would ignite, and every aspect of the royal family's image would be dissected. The implications were not just personal, they were political, symbolic, and legal. Succession, public trust, and the very perception of the monarchy's integrity now hung in the balance. For William, the confirmation of the DNA results was a personal earthquake. A father, a future king, and a public figure all collided in one man confronting an unimaginable truth. Private emotions surged: shock, anger, betrayal, grief, but each had to be carefully controlled, masked behind a veneer of composure expected of a prince. Public appearances could not falter. Interviews, ceremonies, and casual sightings had to remain flawlessly executed, even as the emotional storm raged within. Kate faced her own intricate challenge. She had to manage her heartbreak while protecting her children, particularly Louis. For a child, even subtle changes in tone, body language, or routine can signal that something is wrong. Maintaining normalcy, warmth, and reassurance in a household suddenly dominated by tension required every ounce of Kate's skill, empathy, and emotional intelligence. The Duchess of Cambridge had always been lauded for her grace under pressure, but this trial pushed her resilience to its absolute limit. The secrecy surrounding the revelation also sparked internal tension within the palace. Advisors debated the timing and method of disclosure. Some pushed for immediate transparency, believing that controlling the narrative was essential. Others advocated patience, suggesting that more careful preparation could mitigate damage. Every decision was fraught with risk. Every conversation had the potential to leak or be misinterpreted. In the halls of Buckingham Palace, strategy and emotion collided in a volatile mixture. And yet, despite every precaution, leaks began to emerge. Journalists and media outlets with insider connections noticed unusual patterns: private meetings, sudden travel by key aides, and cryptic statements hinting at upheaval. Speculation mounted. Social media buzzed with theories. Rumors spread faster than the palace could contain them. The truth, once confined to the inner sanctum of royal knowledge, was creeping toward public awareness. What made this revelation particularly explosive was its personal dimension. Scandals involving wealth, missteps, or public behavior are damaging enough, but this hit at the core of family and identity. The very essence of fatherhood, trust, and legacy was now in question. For the monarchy, an institution that thrives on stability, tradition, and perception, this was more than a challenge. It was a crisis that demanded careful handling, strategic foresight, and emotional fortitude. For Prince Louis, however, the complexity of the situation was entirely invisible. His world remained one of toys, laughter, and exploration, untouched by the revelations surrounding his birth. Yet those charged with protecting him knew that innocence could not shield him forever. Questions would arise. Observers would notice. And eventually, the truth, once fully disclosed, would reach him in ways no one could prevent. Even within the palace, reactions varied. Some aides were sympathetic, understanding the human pain behind the revelation. Others were pragmatic, focused solely on damage control and media management. Trust, long assumed to be implicit within the household, became a fragile commodity. Every relationship, every alliance, was suddenly tested against the backdrop of DNA confirmation. Who had known? Who had acted? And who might still have ulterior motives? As the palace braced for the inevitable public announcement, strategies were developed. Messages were carefully crafted. Appearances were scheduled. Security protocols were reinforced. Every move was calculated, yet the emotional undercurrent could not be entirely suppressed. Prince William, King Charles, and Kate knew that the coming days would be chaotic, painful, and scrutinized to an unprecedented degree. The revelation of Prince Louis's parentage was more than news. It was a seismic shift, shaking both the family and the monarchy to its core. And while the DNA results left little room for doubt, they also raised countless new questions. How did this situation come to pass? Who else knew? What were the long-term consequences for the royal line and public trust? And most importantly, how would the monarchy, an institution built on perception and continuity, navigate this extraordinary challenge? The answers would not come immediately, but one thing was certain. Once the truth was revealed, nothing would ever be the same. And the next steps, the decisions made behind closed doors, would determine the fate of not just Prince Louis but the entire royal family. For Prince William, the confirmation of Prince Louis's DNA was not just a shocking revelation. It was a personal earthquake. A future king, trained from birth to handle scrutiny, crisis, and responsibility, found himself confronting a truth that no amount of preparation could have anticipated. In that moment, all the protocols, the carefully rehearsed public appearances, and the centuries of royal etiquette seemed utterly inadequate. The private pain of betrayal collided with the public burden of expectation, creating a storm that threatened to engulf him entirely. It began in the quiet of his private study, far from the gaze of cameras and courtiers. The room, lined with books on history, law, and diplomacy, had always been a sanctuary for thought and reflection. But on that day, it became a prison. William sat alone, the DNA report trembling slightly in his hands, its stark conclusion cutting deeper than any scandal, any political crisis, any public misstep he had faced before. The report was definitive. The child he had cherished, protected, and loved was not his biological son. The weight of that knowledge pressed down with unbearable force. Imagine, for a moment, the emotional impact of such a revelation. A father's identity is intertwined with the bond he shares with his child, and for William, that bond had been his anchor, his motivation, and his public narrative. The realization that biology did not align with belief shattered more than personal pride. It questioned the very foundation of family, trust, and loyalty. And yet, he could not allow the rawness of emotion to dictate his actions. Every gesture, every word, and every decision would ripple through the palace, the country, and the world. The first reaction, instinctive and human, was shock. William could scarcely reconcile the innocence of Louis's smile with the devastating truth that lay behind it. He replayed every memory in his mind, searching for clues, analyzing moments that once seemed ordinary. Was there something he had missed? A gesture, a glance, a hint? The mind races in such moments, and the human heart seeks reasons even when none exist. For William, this cognitive dissonance, the clash between what he had known and what he now knew, was excruciating. Next came anger, a quiet, simmering fury aimed not at Louis, never at Louis, but at the circumstances, at those who had concealed the truth, and at the world that seemed suddenly full of duplicity. How could the palace allow such a revelation to emerge only at this stage? How could confidants, aides, and advisors with knowledge of the situation remain silent for so long? And, perhaps most painfully, how could a relationship he had trusted implicitly be revealed to contain such a profound fracture? But alongside anger and disbelief came an undeniable layer of responsibility. William, as both a father and a public figure, had obligations far beyond personal emotion. The monarchy is not a private entity. It exists in the public eye, subject to intense scrutiny and expectation. Every action, every decision, every statement carries consequences that extend far beyond the personal. William had to think strategically. He had to protect Louis, maintain the stability of his family, and consider the long-term implications for the crown, all while grappling with the human anguish of betrayal and uncertainty. Even as he struggled internally, William knew that the first priority was protection. Louis's welfare, both emotional and psychological, had to be safeguarded. How do you explain to a child the complexity of such a situation without fracturing their innocence? How do you maintain normalcy in the household when every adult around them is aware of a truth that will eventually surface? These were questions that had no easy answers. And yet, William approached them with a mix of careful calculation and deep paternal instinct. Kate, ever his partner in both public and private life, played a critical role during this period. Together, they navigated the delicate balance between shielding Louis from immediate harm and preparing for the inevitable public fallout. Their private conversations, once casual and light, became intensely focused on contingency planning, emotional support, and strategic decision-making. Every decision carried weight, and every choice had to consider the potential for both immediate and long-term impact. Even within the palace, reactions to William's state were mixed. Advisors and confidants recognized his distress, yet they also knew the urgency of containment. Every meeting, every discussion, every instruction had to be framed in a way that balanced compassion with pragmatism. Staff members, who had long been accustomed to functioning as part of a meticulous machine, now faced an unprecedented human crisis at the heart of the institution. The combination of personal anguish and institutional pressure created a tense, electric atmosphere in Buckingham Palace, one in which even small missteps could have outsized consequences. And yet, despite the gravity of the situation, William had to maintain appearances. Public appearances, which had always been carefully choreographed to project stability, loyalty, and composure, could not falter. Cameras would capture every facial expression. Observers would scrutinize his posture, gestures, and tone. Every perceived sign of weakness could be magnified, misinterpreted, or weaponized in the court of public opinion. The stakes were extraordinary, and William was acutely aware of them. The tension extended beyond the immediate family. Courtiers, aides, and advisors found themselves navigating an unprecedented maze of emotion and politics. Decisions about messaging, timing, and disclosure were made in rapid succession, each carrying potential for both mitigation and catastrophe. For William, the constant negotiations, consultations, and deliberations were exhausting, adding layers of complexity to an already overwhelming personal crisis. Amid all this, the human aspect of grief persisted. The moments when William could be alone, when the public gaze was absent, were moments of vulnerability. He wrestled with the sense of betrayal, the heartbreak of disrupted expectations, and the challenge of reconciling the child he loved with the revelation that biology did not align with belief. These moments were private, silent, and profoundly intense, and they underscored the human cost of an event that the world would soon witness in headlines and commentary. And then came the critical question: what should be done next? Every path carried risk. Public disclosure, private resolution, or a carefully managed combination of both. None were without consequences. Advisors debated strategy, weighing legal, public relations, and emotional considerations. The decisions William faced were as complex as any policy issue or international crisis, yet they were deeply personal in a way that magnified their difficulty. Through it all, one truth remained clear: the revelation about Prince Louis's parentage had altered everything. Relationships were tested, loyalties examined, and trust became a fragile, precious commodity. For William, the challenge was not simply processing the news. It was leading a family, an institution, and a nation through a crisis that defied precedent. As the days progressed, tension continued to build. Every meeting, every glance, every whispered conversation in the palace hinted at the underlying turmoil. And while the public remained largely unaware, the gears of strategy were turning at a frantic pace. William's every decision, every expression, every calculated move would shape not only his personal future, but also the legacy of the monarchy. But even as he navigated this unprecedented crisis, one question lingered above all others: how would the world react when the truth could no longer be contained? The announcement was inevitable. The exposure of this secret, this deeply personal revelation, was looming on the horizon. And once the public knew, the consequences would be irreversible. William's journey through shock, anger, and strategic contemplation marked only the beginning. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, emotional turbulence, and political complexity. The palace would never be the same. The family would never be the same. And Prince Louis, the innocent child at the center of the storm, would be caught in the crossfire of truth, loyalty, and betrayal. For Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, the revelation about Prince Louis was a private earthquake that few could truly comprehend. In the public eye, she had always been a model of composure and elegance, the calm anchor to Prince William's often scrutinized life. But behind the carefully curated appearances, behind the poised smiles and the measured gestures, Kate faced a storm that threatened not just her public persona, but her very sense of self. The palace is a world of expectations. Every word spoken, every expression made, every interaction observed, is measured against centuries of precedent. For Kate, the revelation that Louis was not William's biological son was devastating, and yet, she had to navigate it silently, without exposing the rawness of her emotions. A tearful glance, a moment of hesitation, a faltering smile. Any one of these could be amplified by cameras, interpreted incorrectly by observers, and weaponized by critics. Kate understood the stakes. She also understood the cost of vulnerability in a world that demands perfection. Her initial reaction was shock, followed quickly by an urgent focus on the children. For any mother, the welfare of her child is paramount. For Kate, this instinct collided with the broader complexities of royal life. How do you maintain normalcy for a child whose identity is suddenly in question? How do you provide reassurance, love, and stability while grappling with betrayal and heartbreak yourself? These questions became her constant companions, occupying every waking thought, every whispered conversation with William, and every quiet moment alone. Kate's struggle was compounded by the necessity of secrecy. In ordinary families, a revelation like this would be processed in private, with trusted friends or family members offering counsel and support. In the royal family, the stakes were different. Every aide, every advisor, every member of staff had a potential role in the crisis, and even the smallest misstep could lead to public exposure. Kate had to navigate a landscape where trust was limited, and every conversation was measured against the risk of leaking information. This isolation, coupled with the emotional weight of the situation, created a unique and profound burden. Kate's inner turmoil was invisible to the world, yet it shaped every decision she made. She had to remain composed for public appearances, maintain a sense of normalcy for her older children, George and Charlotte, and carefully manage Louis's emotional environment. Every choice was deliberate, every interaction scrutinized, and every gesture carefully calibrated to minimize damage. At the heart of her struggle was the delicate balance between protecting Louis and managing her own heartbreak. The maternal instinct to nurture and shield collided with the harsh reality of palace life, where appearances could be as consequential as actions. Kate had to carefully manage her time with the children, ensuring that they felt secure, loved, and unaware of the turmoil swirling around them. She had to create a protective bubble around Louis, one that would allow him to continue to experience childhood innocence despite the seismic revelations about his parentage. Her partnership with William became crucial during this time. In private, they shared long conversations about strategy, disclosure, and emotional support. William, grappling with his own heartbreak, relied on Kate not only as a partner, but as a stabilizing force for the family. Their conversations were a mixture of planning, reassurance, and quiet lamentation. Together, they formed a united front, both for each other and for their children, while internally navigating the emotional labyrinth of betrayal, loss, and uncertainty. But even in these moments of unity, Kate's personal struggle remained profound. She had to reconcile the love she felt for her family with the shock and sadness caused by the revelation. She had to come to terms with a future in which the public perception of her family might be permanently altered. She had to maintain composure under scrutiny while processing grief privately, a task that required emotional fortitude few could imagine. Beyond the immediate family, Kate also had to manage her relationships within the palace. Senior staff, advisors, and courtiers were all aware of the revelation, each with their own opinions, agendas, and interpretations. Kate had to navigate these relationships delicately, ensuring loyalty and discretion while also asserting her position as a protector of her children. Every interaction carried risk, and every decision could have long-term implications for both her personal in public life. Media speculation added another layer of pressure. While the palace had contained leaks, rumors inevitably began to circulate. Observers noted subtle changes in Kate's demeanor, in the tone of public engagements, and in the composition of family photographs. Social media buzzed with conjecture, and the paparazzi monitored every move. Kate had to maintain a public face of composure, warmth, and confidence while internally wrestling with the emotional fallout. The contrast between public perception and private reality became increasingly stark, highlighting the intense pressure she faced daily. Kate's hidden struggle was not only emotional, but also strategic. Every decision about disclosure, family dynamics, and public appearances had to be weighed against the potential impact on Louis, the monarchy, and the family's public image. Timing was critical. Premature disclosure could lead to chaos. Delayed disclosure risked leaks and speculation. Kate, in consultation with William and trusted advisors, had to calculate the delicate balance between emotional honesty and strategic prudence. The private moments, though rare, were particularly poignant. Late nights in the nursery, quiet conversations with William in dimly lit rooms, and solitary walks through palace gardens became spaces where Kate could process her feelings without an audience. In these moments, her humanity shone through. Her tears, her whispered fears, and her silent determination to protect her children revealed the depth of her struggle. These private acts of resilience contrasted sharply with her public persona, demonstrating the complexity of navigating personal grief in the glare of constant scrutiny. Yet, even in the midst of personal turmoil, Kate displayed remarkable strength. She continued to attend public engagements, meet with charitable organizations, and fulfill her ceremonial duties. Each smile, each handshake, each carefully measured word was an act of courage. She understood that her composure had implications beyond herself, that maintaining stability for the children, the family, and the monarchy was as important as processing her own emotions. And as the revelation about Prince Louis loomed larger in the public consciousness, Kate's role became even more critical. She was not only a mother and a wife, but a guardian of family legacy, a protector of childhood innocence, and a figure of stability in a household suddenly defined by uncertainty. Every action she took, every decision she made, carried significance far beyond the personal. The pressure of secrecy, combined with the weight of emotional upheaval, created a relentless cycle. Kate had to manage her own heartbreak while safeguarding Louis's sense of normalcy, maintain composure under public scrutiny, and navigate the delicate dynamics of the palace. The challenge was extraordinary, yet she faced it with a combination of grace, resilience, and determination that few could match. But even Kate, for all her strength, knew that the situation was far from over. The palace was still navigating the fallout. The public remained largely unaware, and the decisions made in the coming days would have lasting consequences. Every choice, every conversation, every action had the potential to shape the narrative in ways that could either protect or harm the family. And so, Kate continued her hidden struggle, balancing grief, strategy, and maternal instinct with unwavering resolve. She understood that the revelation about Louis's parentage was not just a challenge. It was a defining moment, one that would test her strength, her judgment, and her ability to protect those she loved. Buckingham Palace, for centuries a symbol of poise, power, and meticulous order, had never faced a crisis quite like this. The revelation about Prince Louis's parentage had sent shockwaves through its gilded corridors, shaking the very foundations of its carefully maintained hierarchy. What was normally a place of calm protocol had become a hive of anxiety, secrecy, and whispered speculation. Every advisor, aide, and staff member suddenly realized that they were part of a crisis unprecedented in the modern history of the monarchy. The palace's inner circle moved quickly, yet cautiously. Advisors with decades of experience understood the stakes, and yet even they were navigating uncharted territory. Protocols, scripts, and carefully rehearsed responses were now inadequate in the face of a truth that had both personal and political ramifications. The tension was palpable. Every whisper, every glance, every memo carried weight. A single misstep could ignite a public scandal that would engulf the royal family in a storm of scrutiny and speculation. Meetings were called in urgent succession. Courtiers, aides, and legal advisors gathered in conference rooms usually reserved for ceremonial planning, their faces drawn with concern. Charts, reports, and confidential documents littered tables, while discussions about strategy, messaging, and containment unfolded in hushed, rapid-fire dialogue. Even seasoned members of the royal household found themselves shaken by the gravity of the revelation. For King Charles, the responsibility was immense. As monarch, he understood both the personal and institutional dimensions of the crisis. The monarchy's reputation, the succession line, and public trust all hung in delicate balance. He convened advisors not only to assess immediate action, but to anticipate potential consequences. Every scenario, legal, public relations, and familial, was debated with precision. The king's experience in diplomacy, negotiation, and crisis management would be tested in ways he could never have anticipated. Prince William and Kate, those central figures in the unfolding drama, relied heavily on this advisory network. Yet tension emerged quickly within the ranks. Some advisors pushed for immediate disclosure, believing that transparency would allow the family to control the narrative. Others urged caution, arguing that premature revelation could lead to chaos, media frenzy, and irreversible damage to the monarchy. The debate was intense, reflecting both the complexity of the situation and the human emotions at play. Behind the scenes, secrecy became an obsession. Staff members were instructed to limit conversations, encrypt communications, and carefully monitor access to sensitive information. Even minor incidents, a door left ajar, an overheard conversation, or a misplaced document, could potentially trigger leaks. Trust, long assumed to be implicit within the palace, suddenly became a fragile and precious commodity. And then there were the alliances, the rivalries, and the subtle power plays that always exist within any institution, magnified by crisis. Some courtiers saw opportunity in the chaos, others fear. Advisors jockeyed for influence, attempting to position themselves as the most reliable voices in a storm of uncertainty. Loyalty was scrutinized, motives questioned, and decisions analyzed not just for effectiveness but for alignment with personal and political agendas. The palace had become a chessboard where every move mattered, and the stakes could not have been higher. Amid this tension, a critical focus emerged: how to protect Prince Louis. Though the adults around him were consumed by strategy, legal considerations, and media implications, his welfare remained paramount. Advisors debated the best ways to maintain his sense of normalcy while simultaneously preparing for the public and familial implications of the revelation. Each strategy had to balance immediate emotional needs with long-term consequences, a delicate calculus that left even the most experienced courtiers unsettled. The legal advisors, in particular, played a crucial role. They examined every possible scenario. Implications for the line of succession, guardianship considerations, and potential challenges from extended family or public authorities. They reviewed past precedents, though none came close to matching the current situation. Every potential step was scrutinized for both legal soundness and the optics of public perception. In the palace, law and image are inseparable, and in this case, both were on precarious footing. Security, too, was tightened. Normally discreet measures were amplified to ensure that no unauthorized individuals could access sensitive information. Every document, every communication, and every interaction was carefully monitored. Even the most routine aspects of palace life became high-stakes operations, reflecting the unprecedented vulnerability the institution now faced. As the internal machinery of the palace churned, rumors began to stir outside its walls. Journalists with connections to palace insiders detected unusual patterns: last-minute cancellations, rapid movements of senior aides, and cryptic statements hinting at upheaval. Social media amplified speculation, with observers dissecting every public appearance, every gesture, and every word. The palace's efforts to contain the story were being tested even before an official announcement had been made. Within this environment of heightened tension, human emotions were impossible to suppress. Fear, frustration, loyalty, and betrayal intermingled as staff members navigated their roles. Some were sympathetic to William and Kate's predicament, while others focused on mitigating the potential fallout for the monarchy. Gossip, long a quiet undercurrent in royal life, now threatened to become a weapon, further complicating an already fragile situation. And then came the leaks. Not direct revelations, but subtle hints, cryptic phrases, unusually timed departures, and unexpected media inquiries that suggested the palace's efforts at secrecy were fraying. Advisors and staff scrambled to identify the source, implement damage control, and reassure the royal family. Every day, every hour, every conversation became a test of discipline, loyalty, and discretion. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Charles, William, and Kate coordinated carefully, understanding that even the smallest misstep could have outsized consequences. Strategy sessions combined emotional support with tactical planning, reflecting the dual nature of the crisis. It was both intensely personal and inherently public. Each decision required balancing the immediate welfare of the family with long-term preservation of the monarchy. And yet, even amidst this controlled chaos, the human cost was undeniable. William grappled with his own grief and anger. Kate bore the weight of protecting her children while processing her heartbreak, and Charles faced the challenge of guiding both his son and the monarchy through uncharted waters. The advisors, while focused on strategy, were not immune to the emotional gravity of the situation. Each individual was part of a system that demanded precision and composure, even as the personal stakes reached extraordinary levels. The palace, for all its centuries of tradition and order, had become a pressure cooker of secrecy, strategy, and suspense. Every corridor, every chamber, every office held whispered discussions about the next move, the next public statement, the next precautionary measure. The revelation about Prince Louis's parentage had shifted the palace from a realm of ceremonial predictability to a theater of uncertainty, where every actor understood the potential consequences of miscalculation. As the hours turned to days, the tension continued to escalate. Advisors debated the timing of disclosure, security measures were refined, and contingency plans were drafted and revised. The machinery of the palace moved with both precision and anxiety, aware that history was being written in real time. And amidst it all, one reality remained clear. The revelation about Prince Louis had changed everything. Nothing would be the same, neither within the palace walls nor beyond them. As the walls of Buckingham Palace strained under the weight of secrets, the world outside was blissfully unaware, yet the tension was already leaking. In today's era, the moment a story of this magnitude begins to surface, no palace can remain untouched. Social media chatter, investigative journalism, and whispers among elite circles became the catalyst for a storm that no amount of strategy could fully contain. Within hours, what began as a private revelation about Prince Louis's parentage threatened to become a global media frenzy. The palace had always understood the importance of public perception. For centuries, royal reputation has been carefully curated, every detail meticulously managed. From ceremonial appearances to charitable engagements, every gesture projects a narrative of stability, grace, and continuity. But even the most disciplined narrative can unravel under the relentless scrutiny of modern media. And when the whispers about Prince Louis began to circulate, the palace realized that this would not be a story they could contain forever. The first cracks appeared in online forums and social media platforms. Cryptic posts speculating about unusual palace activity, sudden staff absences, closed-door meetings, and uncharacteristically brief public appearances by William and Kate ignited speculation. Even seemingly minor details, like a photograph showing Kate looking particularly somber during a charity event or William maintaining a stern expression while greeting dignitaries, were dissected, analyzed, and amplified across platforms. Within hours, narratives began to form. Traditional media soon caught up. Journalists with inside connections pieced together patterns, drawing from sources both credible and questionable. Headlines speculated, sometimes subtly, sometimes aggressively, hinting at scandals without yet confirming them. Rumors, once confined to palace circles, were now reaching a public hungry for intrigue. The monarchy's image, a symbol of order, dignity, and continuity, faced a threat like never before. Media experts warned that timing was crucial. Any misstep in communication could inflame speculation, misrepresent facts, and erode public trust. Advisors in the palace scrambled to develop messaging strategies that could contain the narrative while buying time for controlled disclosure. Press briefings, selective leaks, and curated appearances were all considered, each evaluated for potential impact. Every strategy carried risk. Every word mattered. William and Kate, already grappling with private heartbreak, had to navigate this additional layer of scrutiny. Their actions were now not only personal, but symbolic. How they conducted themselves in public, smiles, gestures, tone of voice, would be interpreted as reflections of their response to the revelation. Observers would parse every nuance, looking for signs of guilt, weakness, or fracture. The pressure was unprecedented, and the emotional toll immense. The palace also faced a unique challenge, controlling the narrative without appearing evasive. In an age of instant news and viral speculation, silence could be misread as concealment, while premature disclosure risked chaos. Advisors debated endlessly. Should the palace issue a statement acknowledging the investigation? Should they wait until all facts were confirmed? How should the children be protected during the inevitable media scrutiny? Every question had no perfect answer. International media quickly joined the fray. News outlets around the world began reporting on subtle signs of palace tension, drawing connections and speculating about the implications of Prince Louis's paternity. Royal correspondents, long attuned to palace rhythms, noticed deviations from routine and amplified them into headlines. Television networks, newspapers, and online platforms created 24-hour cycles of coverage, framing every event as evidence of an unfolding drama. The world was watching, even before the palace had formally acknowledged the story. Public reaction, once the story broke, was immediate and intense. Social media exploded with comments, theories, and heated debates. Opinion pieces emerged, weighing moral, ethical, and legal implications. Every aspect of the royal family's image, William and Kate's parenting, the monarchy's integrity, the historical lineage of succession, was called into question. The palace understood that controlling this narrative would require not only strategic messaging, but also an extraordinary level of coordination and patience. Within the palace, advisors worked tirelessly to counteract the tide of speculation. Messaging teams crafted carefully worded statements emphasizing continuity, family unity, and discretion. Security teams monitored media channels for leaks and potential misinformation. Legal experts prepared for potential challenges, whether from the press or from public interest lawsuits. Every department, every role, became hyper-focused on a singular mission, preserving the monarchy's reputation while navigating the unfolding storm. The strain extended to the royal family personally. William and Kate's public appearances became exercises in discipline, composure, and emotional control. Each smile, handshake, and greeting was meticulously calculated to maintain an image of stability. Yet the emotional reality behind those appearances was starkly different. Both were carrying immense grief, shock, and uncertainty, while simultaneously performing roles that demanded confidence, warmth, and authority. Kate, in particular, faced a delicate balancing act. She had to project calm and strength to the public while shielding her children from the growing awareness of rumors. Any perceived faltering could be magnified into a media narrative of weakness, instability, or fracture within the family. Her resilience was tested continuously, requiring not just composure but creative strategies to maintain a sense of normalcy for the children amid growing external scrutiny. Meanwhile, William grappled with the dual role of father and future king under public and media pressure. He understood that every public action, every media appearance, and every carefully measured statement carried symbolic weight. His responsibility to maintain the monarchy's stability was inextricably linked to his personal pain, creating an emotional strain few could imagine. The palace, aware of this delicate balance, provided guidance, but ultimately, the burden of leadership rested on his shoulders. The media storm also created ripple effects within palace operations. Staff members became hyper-aware of their words, actions, and interactions. Every conversation, even within private quarters, was measured against potential exposure. Gossip, once a minor nuisance, became a potential threat. Loyalty and discretion were tested daily. The human dynamics of palace life, long governed by etiquette and protocol, were now dominated by fear, uncertainty, and the pressure to maintain secrecy. And yet, despite the intensity of the media scrutiny, a critical question lingered. When and how would the truth be revealed to the public? Advisors debated the timing relentlessly. Premature disclosure could ignite chaos. Delayed disclosure risked leaks and speculation. The palace had to navigate an extraordinarily narrow path, balancing transparency with strategic containment, while ensuring the children's welfare remained protected. As the story gained momentum externally, internal tension mounted. Advisors, aides, and senior staff all recognized that this was more than a crisis. It was a defining moment for the monarchy. The world was watching, and the stakes were higher than ever. Each decision, each statement, and each calculated move would have long-term consequences for the royal family's reputation, stability, and legacy. Yet, for all the planning, messaging, and precautions, one reality remained. The media storm was unstoppable. Once the narrative gained traction, control would become impossible. The palace could guide, influence, and mitigate, but the public imagination, fueled by curiosity and speculation, could not be contained. Every day that passed brought new headlines, new analyses, and new scrutiny, heightening pressure on William, Kate, and the advisors tasked with navigating the unfolding chaos. And amidst the whirlwind, the human cost persisted. William wrestled with grief and anger. Kate fought to protect her children while maintaining composure, and every staff member operated under intense pressure. The palace, a symbol of continuity and tradition, had become a crucible of emotion, strategy, and vulnerability. The revelation about Prince Louis's parentage did not just shake personal and emotional foundations. It sent shockwaves through the legal and constitutional framework of the monarchy. Suddenly, what had once been a story confined to private heartbreak and palace intrigue became a matter of potential legal consequence and succession scrutiny. For centuries, the line of succession had been clear, codified, and protected. But in an instant, questions emerged that no precedent could fully answer. Legal advisors across Buckingham Palace were thrust into a whirlwind of emergency consultations. Constitutional law, family law, and royal protocols intersected in ways that had never been anticipated. What did it mean for the line of succession if the youngest prince was not biologically William's? Could legal recognition of paternity be challenged? What implications?